Okay. All right, everyone. Thank you for joining the critical conversation today. I'm shifting from DI to DEI. My name is Ruby Garrett. I'm the Assistant Director of the Mosaic Cross Cultural Center and this conversation for today. So thank you for joining in. Again, if you have any questions, put it in the chat. Let me know. But also, if you need to leave, this will be recorded and put up on the website. So continue. It goes. There we go. Before we get started, I do want to acknowledge the land acknowledgement. So both the city and county surrounding the campus are named for the Wichita peoples, the most recent stewards of the lands and waters in this region. Wichita were preceded by the Geronimo people and possibly the Apache. Along with the Comanche, Kickapoo, and Kiowa peoples, the Wichita farm hunted and traded on both sides of the Red River. As a community committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion, recognizing the land and its original stewards is a call to action. We cannot change the past, but today we can make decisions and hold ourselves accountable for better serving our local Indigenous communities and the nations represented within. We speak the names of these peoples respectively in the present sense. Humano, Apache, who refer to themselves as Inde, meaning person or people. Wichita, who call themselves Kitikishi, the raccoon-eyed people. Kiowa, the principal people. Comanche or Numanu, meaning the people. Kickapoo or Ki'ikapu, which means moving about. In this moment, we honor their resilience, consider the implications of the past, and commit to do better tomorrow. So we do this land acknowledgement to also, as you heard, to acknowledge people that were here before us. So I wanted to go ahead and start the webinar before we go to the conversation of DEI. So why do we focus on justice? So diversity. Everyone knows basically what diversity is. Short is a wide range of identities. So myself, I represent, or how I identify is going to be Hispanic. I'm a woman, I'm Catholic. So there's multiple identities that people have. And so that's something that people often forget and see in the picture. There's just diversity within a group. And that's something that we always look at. We also forget that there's multiple identities within a person. Inclusion is any individual or group can be and feel welcome, respected, supported, and valued. So not only is there diversity within the group, but making sure that people feel included or just belonging. And sometimes you can have both. Sometimes you have diversity, but there is still being the sense of non-belonging in a room. So that's something as well that we see. I do have a poll on here, but I just wanted to kind of point this out. This is what mostly it's focused on, and it has been in the past, just DI, so diversity and inclusion. And that's something that we have mostly seen. I do have a poll, and let me see if it goes. Or it will not let me. Oh, here it is. Okay, so I just launched a poll, and I can't move this. I can. I launched a poll. If you can answer the question, what does the E stand for in DEI? Answer this question, please. I'll give you a couple more minutes. Okay, I think everyone has answered it. So I'm happy to say everyone got it right. E is for equity. One of the things that people have often forgotten was that E is for equity, and a lot of people think that it's equality. And it is pretty similar. Obviously, looks very similar to equity and equality, but if you see in the picture, that's something that is not the case. So thinking about what exactly is equality, meaning is everyone is treated the exact same way, regardless of the differences that there is. So I see in the picture on the bottom how there's the same situation, the same scene, but different circumstance for another person, which meaning equity means everyone is provided with what they need to succeed. And the other side of the picture on the right side is same situation, but the people are now having different scenarios to where they can actually see the game that's going on. And so that's what mostly people, especially if I ask any of the students, they think that equity and equality are exactly the same. And that's what most often we think of sometimes. But that's something that we always need to think about, is that there's a difference regardless of what it is. So, and the next one. So recognizing the E. So like I said, equity is fair treatment all across the board. But one of the main things, identifying and eliminating barriers. So we have to recognize the way where it's not displaying equity. Sometimes you can't change a situation, but you can change the way the situation is handled. Like in the picture on the back and the other slide, saying that they're the same situation, but different circumstances for each person. And so it's up to us to kind of look at that and making sure that we are looking at what exactly is fair treatment, what is there any barriers for every person? And so we need to make sure that we have that included in whatever we do in our space. So without equity, not only do you risk never moving towards welcoming and appreciation, but you risk backsliding on the progress you have already made. So even though there can be a diverse environment, a place where everyone feels included and there's inclusivity in there, if you don't have equity to making sure that there's fair treatment and there's some barriers on the barriers that they're there that we're eliminating and that we're identifying, it can backslide and go back to not really feeling inclusive and not feeling belonging. You can be inclusive, but then there's one group can be included and they can feel belonged, while the other group is not, because there are some barriers there that we're not identifying and we're eliminating. So there's a different reason why we need equity and making sure that we actually have the equity. So questions to ask. So some of the questions that we need to ask is whenever we're looking into this is that, how is everyone being treated? And so some people, whenever we're looking at situations, we kind of put people in together. But if you're actually following the DEI, knowing the diverse population, how can we make sure everyone feels belonged? What are the barriers for every identity that is there? Asking the question of, how is everyone being treated? Are there differences in how they are being treated? Is there a reason why this group, if I'm in this group as Hispanic women, is there a reason why this group is facing this barrier while this Hispanic male is not? And so making sure that there's differences between that. And what would need to change to ensure that everyone is getting equal or getting access to equal opportunities. So just like going back to the picture that we saw of whenever it was the same situation, everyone was watching the baseball game except for the ones that was a little bit shorter. How can we make sure that what we need to change is equal access to opportunities? How might new conditions or circumstances change how we make decisions? Sometimes it could be easygoing and we don't really know that there's change until there is something that is new. And so we have to kind of look at those conditions, circumstances to make sure that whatever decisions that we're impacting or we're doing, we kind of go back and see, is everyone being treated the same? Are there differences? And that's seeing if there's any new conditions or circumstances. Our mindsets and processes that worked before still working. We love tradition. Some people love tradition and some people that want it to stay that way. However, and some of the things that we think of, why change it when it's, when it's working? If it doesn't need to be fixed, why do we need to change it? Why do we need to work on that? Well, that's something that we kind of need to look at too, is that we've been doing the same thing over and over again. Is it actually working? Is it actually helping the people feel the diversity in that group, feel belonged? Is it being equitable? Is there any barriers, new barriers that's happening? I think we live in an age now that after we're still going through COVID, that things that we have done before is not going to work. Things that we have done in a certain way of teaching, how to communicate, it's not working anymore. So that's something that we had to kind of look back into and say, it's not going to work. What are the new processes that can kind of look at that? And what would shifting mindsets and changing processes do to a sense of belonging within an organization? So there is a lot of changes that need to happen. Example, COVID again, a lot of changes that were needed to be made, whether it was going virtually or having virtual meetings or communicating by phone, text, whatever. Any of the mindsets and the processes that we do things, is it going to exclude a group? An example of that is some students or some maybe faculty staff were in an area where the Wi-Fi was down, to doing processes like that. Maybe it wasn't a good process for them, and how can we make sure that they still feel belong to MSU while they're having those differences? And so whenever we have any other process that we're looking at, making sure that there is whatever we're doing, as much as we want to change, as much as we want to make sure that we're moving forward, that there is still a sense of belonging with an organization, that we're not shifting change so fast to where they can't feel belonged and they don't get their 2 cents in, as you may say. And so we need to make sure that we are looking into that as well. So these are just some of the questions. There's probably more questions to ask. So when you're looking into your space, into your area, wherever you work in, your classroom, you kind of look and see what's going on. And so this is the kind of thing where you're not going to answer these questions so fast. You're not going to look into this and answer these and know in 5 minutes it's going to change the next, a couple of days. But it's really looking into it and thinking of being mindful, because these are not going to be switching from DI to making sure it's being equitable. It's not going to go super fast, and it's not going to go someplace where all of a sudden it's going to change. But these are some mindful questions to ask. Next one. Oh, so sorry, I skipped there a little bit. So E can also stand for multiple words. Empathy. Yes, we love to share our feelings, right? Everyone loves to feel. I hear a lot of things saying people don't want to, especially when it comes to DEI. People just think of, looking at a strategic plan and going through that and making sure we're checking these boxes. But one of the things that we forget is that the reason why we're doing it is because we need to help people. It's humans, it's human behavior. And so making sure that there is some empathy. And empathy is the ability to understand and share the feelings of another. I'm not saying to always be empathy. You don't have to cry for every situation. You don't have to. It's more of making sure that you understand. So this is a really short, as it's called, about empathy. So I'm going to play it really fast.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, I'm down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now. I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Okay. All right, so that was a very short video, like I said, about empathy. Like I said, I am not telling you to share all the feelings with somebody, especially in a situation where it could be uncomfortable. It's up to you of how comfortable you want to be with the next person. But I did want to share that because one thing, one thing is, why is empathy important to DEI? And so, as we said, diversity, equity, and inclusive. Why is E can also be empathy? It's a great way to build engagement and support around DEI. One of the reasons why we do DEI and want to make sure people feel belonging, we have to understand how the person is. Why is the situation happening? You know, why are they feeling this way? And we cannot know unless we have empathy. And so sometimes it's really hard to start sharing. Sometimes you do not need to share. You just need to listen. You just need to hear the person vent. You just need to kind of be there for the person and really just say, I don't know, I'm not feeling the same way. I've never felt this way before, but I understand what you're feeling. Please tell me more about it. And so that's the only way of actually learning more about the person and how to make sure that they feel belonging, based off what they're making sure that there's no barriers as well that we can help them with. And so empathy also builds engagement, and we don't want to give in to resistance. And so that's something as well. And so as we're going through, especially MSU going through this DEI plan, we want to make sure, and kind of going back to the questions that I had earlier of how to be equitable, those questions were dealing with a little bit about empathy, because you're asking how the person feels of belonging. What barriers are they looking at? And so that's something that we don't want to look at. We don't want to think about the person's feelings sometimes, because it could go into a deep hole, like the video is. You go into a deep hole, you go into a rabbit hole, you know, feeling all the feelings, and then you may be in some feelings, but it's something that we have to also make sure that we look at. So just a couple of tips, and they did talk about this in the video, but when you're looking at this and also looking at the plan, the DEI plan, and looking in your space, is whenever a person's talking to you about any of the situations of how, and looking into your space and how to be inclusive and equitable and making sure it's diverse, it's kind of looking in the perspective taking. So the ability to walk in another person's shoes or to see a situation through their eyes. And so this is something that I think we've all kind of heard. You know, if you only work in the person's shoes, you can see how they feel. And so that's another thing, going back to those equitable questions, is if you were in the situation, how would you feel? I'm not saying to really like be the person, and because that could be something else as well, but kind of asking them if they're comfortable telling about what does it mean being in the person's shoes. Saying out of judgment. In the video, you know, we love to judge people sometimes, but the ability to listen to other perspectives instead of jumping to conclusions. And so that's a lot of what people do, as well as making assumptions. And that's something that you don't want to make assumptions for, especially when it comes to diversity in your identity, which is an example, which we'll talk about later in actionable items, is an example of pronouns. Asking people what their pronouns are, making sure that you don't jump to conclusions to assume that their identity is. So that's kind of being respectful to the person as well. Recognizing the emotion, the ability to identify with what another is feeling, and tap into that familiar feeling within yourself. We're not going to have the same situations. I'm going to have a different situation than what you're going to have. But if you're able to kind of have something not similar, but something to where, like, I know how you felt. So I was in a totally different situation, but I know what you felt. How can we help you make sure that you feel belonging, and making sure that we can eliminate that barrier, and having the ability to communicate, ability to voice an understanding of their emotions and to validate them. You don't want to go to the person and say, just like the video, at least blah, 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 blah. You don't want to say something like that, because that means you're really not looking or listening to the situation that the person is having. You're kind of just patting them on the back, saying, it'll be okay, we'll get through it. But really, they'll have to get through it. They're going to have to go through this unless you're able to kind of go back and understand, listen, communicate with them, and help them along their journey. if they're willing to let you. And so that's, kind of going back to those questions, those equitable questions, reading them in a different light, not just checking off boxes, but also making sure there's a little bit of empathy within that, because any DEI plan, any DEI in your workspace, in your classroom, is not going to affect just you. It's going to affect the people around you, the students, the faculty, staff. So we want to make sure that you're not just checking boxes. You're not saying, oh, we did that already, that's what we're doing, but there's a reason why you're doing it. DEI is to help people. And so making sure that it's human interaction, and that's what we're here for. So going off of that, I did want to circle back around to the DEI plan at MSU Texas, and kind of what we talked about. All of these are going back into being diverse, equitable, and inclusive, and as well as making sure that there's a little bit of empathy in that, actually, when you think about it. So going back to the mission and vision, there is a clear DEI message in the MSU Texas mission, vision, and strategic plan. That's what the plan is, making sure that these are just bullet points. It's actually longer, but these are just bullet points of what the plan is. Making sure that there's accountability to promote institutional DEI accountability aimed at the creation of welcoming multicultural environment. And that is making sure that there is a sense of belonging in the multicultural environment, as well as the belonging, which is empathy, and making sure that people are looking at what kind of barriers are we seeing, making sure that we're accountable, because if we're not accountable, people are going to say something. And we saw that in the summer of 2020, when people were not held accountable what they need to do, which is kind of how the DEI strategic plan kind of came into place, because we needed to hold ourselves accountable, and other people are actually helping us as well. So making sure that there's diverse staffing to hire and retain more faculty and staff that better reflects the diversity of MSU Texas student population in the state of Texas. If you are in a classroom, or if you're in the Clark Student Center, or if you're around, you will see the diverse faculty and staff somewhat compared to the students. There's way more diversity within our students and our faculty and staff. And so that's something that there's in the plan, making sure that there's a sense of belonging here at MSU for faculty and staff, but also for the students, because going into a classroom and with the student as a person of color and actually seeing a person of color teach them is very impactful. So making sure that that's something as well that we had in our DEI plan. Also making sure the educational environment is up to DEI as well, to educate students in experiences that promote greater awareness and multiple perspectives and build capacity to work effectively across cultural differences. And so this is a step going into what people say the real world. We need to make sure that there is situations to where people are able to see that there is different perspectives, that there is different diversity around the area, that there is going to be barriers within some places, but making sure that we're able to kind of knock them down. And how can we find a solution about that? So making sure that they're able to look at the cultural differences, but also look at the cultural similarities as well, but making sure that the differences are stronger than similarities. And so that's something as well that is included into this plan. And so the main purpose, of course, is promoting and coordinating DEI efforts at MSU and quality of life issues external to campus. And so that's some of the things for the DEI plan. This plan, though, is on the website. If you go to the Mosaic website, it'll be on the top part. It's like a little alert button. Please read that, because that's something that, I can say all these bullet points, but there's way more information of how we can actually accomplish these goals. So going to actionable items. So we kind of talked about what DEI is, including a little bit of the empathy part. What is MSU doing? But here are the actionable items that you can do now. So instead of waiting for the DEI plan it has updates right now. So you can go on the website and see the updates. But instead of waiting to hear from, here are the updates, oh, that's good, I'm glad that's happening. Actually, here are things that you can do right now yourself. Read the DEI program, read the strategic plan and see what's going on with campus, and look and see what we can do as well. If you have any questions, You can always ask our office, the Mosaic office, to see what we can help you with, who to guide you, who's in charge of certain plans and certain goals. Reviewing your policies, your meetings, any of the classroom, your syllabus, reading those and making sure that there is DEI related. Our office can help you look into that. We're actually looking at resources to make sure, especially for faculty and staff that are teaching syllabus wise, making sure that there is DEI within there to make sure it's belonging. There's not any equitable issues, and making sure that's in place. Have conversations. This is an example of having a conversation. Though I am talking, we can have conversations at the end, but having conversations with other of your peers, asking them about how they feel about certain things and seeing that. Having, just like the video is empathy. Sometimes you don't have to actually talk, you can just listen and see what's going on. Supporting gender expressions. Example is start using pronouns. I said earlier, let people identify who they are. Let people identify how they want to be spoken to. If you have questions about pronouns, it is on our website under resources about pronouns. But example, my pronouns are she, her, hers, and letting me express myself on my Zoom. I have it on my email signature. Anything where I can put my pronouns are, I put them on there, because that's also a signal of another person that is wanting to express their gender to kind of look into me and say, oh, they know what pronouns are, I'm more comfortable with them. Instead of just assuming who I am, they're going to be respectful and let me say who I am. So that's something as well. Educating yourself on inclusive terms. On our website as well, we have a new term list of inclusive terms on resources, making sure that you know exactly what the terms are. Pronouns are on there, so you can look and see what pronouns are, as well as land acknowledgement. And the very beginning, I did a land acknowledgement, making sure that I acknowledge the people that were here before us and here at MSU. And that's something that you can do as well. You can share land acknowledgement before a webinar, before a conversation of a meeting of some sort, before a ceremony that you do. Especially some of our big programs like a gala or any of the graduations that we host in our office, we do a land acknowledgement. And this is not to just acknowledge and say, yes, we took people's land. Fortunately, that's kind of what it is. But it's also saying that we acknowledge what we did and we cannot go back, but we can move forward on how to make sure that this doesn't happen again. And we continue acknowledging people and how we can help improve. And so that's something as well that I acknowledge. It's not just a checkbox, but it's something that we can also have with meaning. And promoting or going to diverse events. I know in some ages people don't want to go to any events right now, and that's totally fine, but if you can promote it, we have so much diversity here on campus. It's one of the things I always say, or student-wise, is that there's so much diversity here, and there's events going on within different organizations and different groups that we can help promote, and we can make sure that we are letting people know about their culture, or letting them know about how people can they can belong. So especially if you see any students that are in those groups where they're not finding their sense of belonging, they're needing help, they haven't really got involved in college because they can't find that community, let us know. You can always come to the office, or you can send them to the office. You can email me, anyone in the office, and let the student know that they can come in here. We had a couple of students that had no place to go, and they were having questions of how they can get involved because they wanted to find that community. And there's just so much diversity here on campus and so many events that they can go to, that if you know what's going on campus, that's something as well. So making sure that if you can't go, that's totally fine, but promoting it to your classrooms, to your faculty, staff, letting them know what's going on campus so they can find themselves as well, seeing they want to belong into some area as well. So, and to find different events, you can always ask us, or you can go on Mustang's link, which is on the website as well, and see what's going on here on campus. But to tie this in, the very end is my last slide. and we'll have any questions. If you have any questions, feel free to put in the chat, or you can raise your hand in a few minutes. But I kind of wanted to have this as an introduction for the next critical conversations that's happening in March. And I'm deciding on the date, making sure that I have the students to do it. But it's going to be called managing difficult conversations and dynamics, and how to use these skills in real life situations. So sometimes there's situations to where we can't stop it. There's some things that's happening, a student, a faculty, staff, or a person just around you in your space is having a difficult time and they need someone to talk to. And sometimes it just kind of comes out to whoever is there in front of them. And so instead of kind of weaning them off or letting them go, or just observing it happen, if it's happening in your classroom or in your space, you're able to actually handle the situation, not really just handle, but as well as helping the person solve the situation or just hearing them out. So this critical conversations will be more of an interactive conversation to where students will have a situation and they'll talk about it. And then we'll kind of have tips about how to talk to, how to address this. It's not always going to work for every situation, but it's something that you can kind of lean on to. So this was kind of an introduction as to making sure that there's DEI within your classroom. And then how can we handle these conversations after learning about it, that you're starting to kind of really see in your classroom, in your space, that how can you handle the situations? And so that's kind of what I wanted to have this as an introduction. And the next one coming in and talking about conversations and how can you handle the conversations and making sure that your classroom or your space around you is inclusive and making sure that it's equitable as well. So, but okay, so I talked a lot. That's kind of wanted to go through this, but I am going to stop sharing. But if anyone have any questions, you can raise your hand, you can put it on the chat, or if you have any comments as well, please feel free. So if no one has, if you have a question, we'll be here. I'm going to stop recording in a second. But I will send you, this link will be on the website. And if you want to share this out, or if you came a little bit late, or if you left early or anything, you can feel free to have this link and send it off to anybody else. Tomorrow as well, I will send a survey. So if you please fill out the survey, this also helps our office to make sure that we are having trainings that everyone is able to do, as well as any suggestions for other trainings that we can have conversations. So stop recording.